inviting me to CITICED. I'm very honored to be here to talk to you about distance education in the United States. And when I talked with Maria and asked her about what this audience wants to hear about, we talked about distance education as a disruption in the United States and how it is interacting across the spectrum of different education opportunities for students. To begin, I'd like to show you this slide because it sums up a lot of concern in the United States for higher education. Mr. Christensen is a well-known author and researcher in the field of education in the United States. And the concern is that our universities and our colleges don't have enough attention on technology to make sure that they're sustainable. Isn't it astonishing to think that in just 15 years, half of the universities in the United States could be in bankruptcy? So I want to talk a little bit about innovation as a radical emergence in the United States. Several years ago, something called a MOOC, a massive open online course, started to become popular in the United States. The MOOC was first created by a Stanford professor. His name is Andrew Ng. Andrew Ng teaches artificial intelligence at Stanford University, and he began to put his classes online for free for anyone who wanted to take his course. If you can imagine being able to take a free course from a Stanford professor was quite remarkable. Other faculty started to put their coursework in distance education over the internet for free. And all of a sudden, there was this big change in higher education in the United States. All of a sudden, distance education in online form was becoming just as popular as traditional. And education technology in the United States began to be part of every student's learning experience. Lots of attention is being given to the quality of the distance education experience, its affordability, and personalized learning. What can be done for a student to support them in their own individual way? Also, non-institutional providers of distance education began to become more popular. This is quite a threat to colleges and universities in the United States because companies are providing distance education courses direct to learners. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later on in my presentation. So this landscape in higher education in the United States, it's messy. All of this innovation is struggling to find its appropriate place. In the United States, we have lots of different types of institutions. Some are operated by the 50 states, as in a state university system, and they are supported financially by the states. Other institutions, such as Stanford or Harvard, are private colleges, are autonomous in their financial model. They're supported by student tuition, by grant for-profit education. And some may reach here to the Dominican Republic. Maybe you have seen University of Phoenix, or Capella, or Walden, large for-profit institutions that are financed by student tuition and by shareholders on Wall Street. It makes for a messy design of higher education in the United States. A lot of questions come up about what is faculty's role? How do faculty and administration work together? And how can the institution sustain its future with all of these different activities in higher education? Let me talk a little bit more about the timeline of distance education's emergence in the United States. So in this timeline, you can see that fully online programs started to become more popular for students in the 1990s. We then started to see more blended and flipped classrooms. A flipped classroom is when a student watches a lecture via video or on YouTube or in some kind of distance format, and then they come to the institution for their discussion and for their research, and they're partnering with other students. In 2008, 2009, we saw MOOCs, massive open online courses, start to provide content to students anywhere in the world. And finally, open sources are becoming more integrated in distance education. What I mean by open source is resources that are not necessarily in a university library. Open sources are documents, papers, journals that are available to anyone. Distance education is making learning possible for anybody that has an internet connection, as you well know. I want to talk a little bit more about these distinctive characteristics. Ad hoc courses and programs are typically designed by faculty. They are done maybe outside of an institution's mission or policy. Faculty explore lots of new mediums for meeting specific needs of students, but this is not where distance education is growing. Fully online programs and institutions. This is the biggest driver in the United States right now. Complicated, very sophisticated instructional design teams are taking the place of an individual faculty member creating curriculum to certain colleges and universities. I must say that there is some concern about this, earning college credit from entities that are not colleges. This is something in the United States that is receiving a lot of attention, particularly by the Department of Education. Here are some examples of these non-institutional providers. Straighterline, Sophia, Elsevier, they offer their courses to anyone who wants to pay, and it's usually a very modest amount, maybe $250 to take their course, and you can get 3 credits that can then be transitioned into a college or university. It's a very new and important model that we need to continue to watch very carefully. Another aspect of non-institutional providers is how it is determined that the credits are earned. In the United States, we've had a very long tradition of what's called the Carnegie unit of measurement. The Carnegie unit is what's used to determine a student has achieved their competency in a certain course. But these providers, if I could just go back, these providers are awarding credit based on not necessarily the length of time the student has sat in class, but they're basing it on examinations and assessment that shows competency at any point in time. Why this is so revolutionary is because you can earn your credits at a pace the student determines, and not the university. This is a bit of a wake-up call to traditional higher education in the United States, where students sit patiently through 16-week semesters, and they earn their credits based on the time the university says they must be engaged as a student. These providers are telling students, as quickly as you want to work, as quickly as you want to demonstrate your competency, you can earn your credit. This is a disruption in higher education in the United States. Here is how these providers demonstrate themselves on the internet. Save your time, save your money, come to us, take your courses, and then you can move along in a very flexible way to complete your higher education credential. Here is an interesting example of an institution that works with different providers in distance education. This is Western Governors University. I call them a subscription model. And how it works is distance education students pay for a 6-month period of time. And in 6 months, they can take as many courses as they want, as quickly as they want. But they must complete their work in 6 months. They can purchase another 6-month subscription and take courses as quickly as they want. That way, they can work towards a bachelor degree or a master's degree, working at their own pace. My sister's husband wanted to earn a master's degree in business administration, and he asked me about Western Governors University. He had talked with them. He really wasn't sure about a university that didn't offer courses in the traditional semester format. I told him I knew that they had a reputation of quality. I told him that I knew students that were experiencing learning in this type of format were expressing their satisfaction. So he decided to try it. I'm happy to say that last year he did graduate with a master's degree in business administration. What he loved about his experience is he works full-time, he has a family, and some 6-month periods he was able to finish as many as 5 courses if he worked really hard. In other 6-month increments, he might be able to finish 1 or 2 courses because of work and family demands, but he appreciated the flexibility. One aspect of Western Governors that supported my brother-in-law was academic coaching. Once a week, he had to communicate with an academic coach, not a faculty member, but somebody
who was part of the program and whose job it was to communicate with him on his progress every week. Our university system in the United States has to start paying closer attention to the Western governor universities, because this is where our students are being drawn. Finally, I want to talk about something that we're calling boot camp. In the United States, these very short technical courses online are not attached to a university or a college, but they're delivered in what they call a boot camp format. I think they just want to sound cute, boot camp for technology training. Again, lots of interest in these boot camps and how they prepare individuals for a very specific career path. Finally, Khan Academy. Has anyone here ever heard of Khan Academy? Some of you, yeah. So Khan Academy was started by a gentleman who had some relatives that were struggling in some of their courses. He started recording these very short little YouTube instruction pieces, very modest, and suddenly hundreds of thousands of people are watching these videos and learning from Mr. Khan. It really shook up the narrative that only a faculty member can support student learning, that there aren't resources available outside of the classroom. The Khan system is now an academy that affects millions of students who use their resources. Khan Academy is another example of a disruption in higher education. When I give my presentations, I find that there is interest in what's the data? What do we know about distance education enrollment in the United States? A big challenge in the United States is that we're a decentralized system. Institutions have a lot of autonomy. We don't have a Ministry of Education format in the United States. It's very difficult to collect data across the spectrum of state universities and private colleges and for-profit training centers. We've started to learn more about data collection, so let me just share with you some results of a survey that was done in 2013. So this is the estimated number, was pulled together by researchers at the Department of Education in the United States. And in 2013, at our public universities, 3.7 million students took at least one distance education course. And that was up modestly from 2002. In private, nonprofit institutions, 795,000 students took at least one distance education course. And then at private for-profit institutions, a bit more, 982,542 students. So the grand total in the United States for 2013, we believe, is about 5.5 million students took at least one online course as part of their pursuit of a degree. Now, when you think about students exclusively enrolled in distance education only, the numbers look a bit different, but they're still compelling. Our data at the Department of Education shows that 1.2 million students exclusively studied in distance education in our state university system. 520,000 in the private nonprofit, 856,000 in the private for-profit, through a grand total of 2.659,203 million students in 2013 exclusively studied via distance education. I imagine that today those numbers are much higher because our institutions are getting much better at providing distance education. Here's a list of institutions in the United States that have some of the largest distance education enrollments. University of Phoenix is the most significant. That continues today with about 207,000 students exclusively enrolled in distance education programs. Western Governors University, the example I just spoke with you about, has about 46,000 students exclusively in their distance education programs. I think it's interesting and very important to look at these data and to see what lies ahead in the future for distance education and learning in the United States. But what about the student? All of these innovations and emerging technologies and new opportunities, what do the students think? This rather funny post that I like to share when I present. I think I'll read this to you. This was sent to me by one of my friends. A question for my friends who entered the workforce before the internet was ubiquitous. How did you figure out how to do anything? What if you had a question that needed answering about something you were trying to accomplish? How would you teach yourself new skills and then verify you were doing it correctly? How would you wing it if you don't have prior knowledge in an area? It boggles my mind. How many of you have students out there who can't imagine learning and preparing for your courses without an internet? I did it the old-fashioned way. I went to the library. I also like to think about our students in this context. Kathy Davidson, well-known author about K-12 education, says this: she believes 58% of our grade school children will be employed in careers that don't exist right now. And so the result of all of this disruption means that 15 years from now, our universities will see their roles very differently. And if you think back to Clayton Christensen in my first slide, where he said 15 years from now, many institutions will be in bankruptcy and fading from existence. That will happen if we don't see our roles differently. When Maria and I planned this session, she said, let's be sure to talk about quality assurance considerations in view of these disruptions. She said the audience had individuals concerned about quality and that functioned in the role of quality assurance and accreditation. So here are some key areas that my organization, the Distance Education Accrediting Commission, considers when we look at distance education. We look for a clearly defined mission and well-established learning objectives and student learning outcomes that tie back to those objectives? And what is the evidence the institution has about student learning and accomplishment of those objectives? We examine institutional effectiveness planning. We want to see a well-documented plan that involves faculty, administrators, technology experts, learning designers that plan into the future how the institution is going to sustain its mission, its learning objectives, and student performance. We take a very deep look at the curriculum. We take the curriculum and we send it to experts across the university system for feedback. We look at the learning materials. We look at any laboratories that students might need for practicing their career. We look at student support services. If you think back to my brother-in-law who worked with a coach that helped him plan and stay on task for his learning, we look at ways a distance education institution provides service to students to keep them enrolled, to keep them making progress. At DEAC, we require once a year our institutions take a student satisfaction survey and send us the results. We also require once a year a report on student achievement. What is the evidence students are meeting their education goals at your institution's distance education program? We're also very concerned with academic leadership and faculty qualifications. We carefully audit faculty member credentials and background, and do they have the appropriate degree qualification to teach? But also, do they have the pedagogy to teach online? Just because you're effective in a classroom traditional format doesn't mean you're going to be effective in a distance education online format. We look at ways the institution assures good distance education pedagogy. We look at advertising, literature, and recruitment practice. It is never okay to promise something to a student that you can't deliver. And we always want to make sure that students have a clear understanding of the distance education program they've made a commitment to. Finally, admissions and enrollment agreements have to establish the student's identity. That is one challenge of distance education that is brought to my attention, is how do you know that the student on the other end of that internet site is doing the work? Dr. Matthews, how do you make sure? I get that question all the time. We require our institutions to provide evidence that they do exactly that, whether it's proctored examinations using video conferencing. Some of our institutions have sophisticated algorithms that can detect by keystroke signature. This is something new for me. Apparently we all have a keystroke signature. How many of you knew that? Did you know? You have a keystroke signature when you type. And some of our institutions use that as a means to verify student identity. Governance and financial responsibility. We look every year at the financial status of each accredited institution to make sure that they have the resources for continued sustainability. Just a few more comments about quality assurance in a disruptive and innovative world. First of all, make sure to distinguish the right target population for distance education. It's not for everybody. It's funny to be the executive director of DEAC. I would be a terrible distance education student. I like being present with faculty. I like being surrounded by a peer group of learners that share my passion. It's where I'm most effective as a student. I'm not the target population for distance education. Isn't that funny? But there are many out there who are. My brother-in-law is such an example. Know your target population. Align the pedagogy with the discipline. Some disciplines, especially in the technology fields, are well aligned with distance education. Some are simply not. Areas maybe like social work, counseling, literature might have a way to go to firmly establish the appropriate pedagogy for distance education. Be supportive of some degree of customization for online courses. What are the special nuances that students need to have available to them to be fully successful in an online environment? And here's one of my favorites. Assemble real evidence from rigorous research about the learning outcomes. Too much is assumed about distance education and its effectiveness for learning. I think as a global interest in distance education, we must assemble better research about how students learn and how it's effective. Optimize faculty when designing and planning for distance education courses. And across the institution, system-wide thinking about distance education's impact, not just for that one lesson, not just that one video or that one resource. Implement across the institution system-wide thinking about distance education. It's been my great pleasure to have an opportunity to talk with you this morning about what's on my mind in distance education. Feel free anytime to visit our website. It's www.deac.org. And also, if you would like to follow me on Twitter, here's my Twitter address. I actually sent out a tweet right before we started today to say how excited and how thrilled I am to speak at CITICED. Thank you for listening so politely. I'm here to answer your questions. Thank you.
Para la doctora Matthews, la primera pregunta la voy a leer primero en español, luego la voy a traducir para la doctora. ¿Cuál es el nivel de legalidad de estas universidades? Refiriéndose a la universidad, menciona Atlantic International University, Humboldt International University. The question is, Dr. Matthews, regarding Atlantic International University and Humboldt International University, if these are accredited university to your knowledge? What is the level of legality? It's the exact question of Atlantic International University and Humboldt International University. Si quiere
Is the whether
just come here, please. We'll switch back and forth here. It's okay.
is the question whether it's accredited?
They are asking the level of legality. If they are accredited.
Okay. Well, if you are looking for information about whether an institution has legal authority and is accredited, there's a very important website called www.chea.org. CHEA. It is a list of every institution in the United States that has accreditation. May I say a few words about diploma mill problems, if that is okay? In the United States, there are concerns with diploma mills. These are fake universities that promise a degree that will be accepted. Most often, an individual will pay a few $1,000s, submit their work experience, and a month later they have a PhD in something. Combating diploma mills is getting easier in the United States, and one way we've worked to try to combat diploma mills is to always have a good list of an institution that is accredited. So www.chea.org is a resource for all accredited institutions in the United States. If an institution is not on that list, you should ask some questions about its legitimacy.
Gracias. Otra pregunta para la doctora LEAH es ¿cómo se puede determinar que una universidad de educación a distancia es legal? Ya esta pregunta creo que fue respondida con la explicación que ella nos acaba de dar respecto a las factorías de títulos. This question was already answered by you, so I'm not going to read it. Antes de hacer esta pregunta, quiero aclararles que la doctora LEAH no trabaja para el gobierno de los Estados Unidos. De modo que la siguiente pregunta, ella considerará si la responde o no, pero solamente quiero aclararles eso. ¿Cuáles son las preocupaciones que tiene el Departamento de Educación sobre los proveedores? ¿Por qué? ¿Cuáles son las soluciones planteadas o qué está haciendo el gobierno al respecto? Tenemos 5 preguntas en esta sola. It's a complex question. It's what are the worries, what are the concerns that the Department of Education has about the providers that you mentioned? Why? And what are the solutions on the table, if any? Or what is government doing about it?
So, the non-institutional providers that offer courses, why are we concerned? Because in the United States, we have a fixation that the university and the faculty at the university are the very best source for education. And when these non-institutional entities get more and more involved with providing distance ed courses, it raises concern. But here's the thing. Employers in the United States have been very unhappy with the graduates they hire. They say the graduates can't write, they can't perform basic math, they don't work well in teams, and the performance of graduates from the university system in the workplace has been very, very disappointing. What are we going to do about that? I think that these distance ed providers are trying to fill a gap that somehow the university system isn't filling. The U.S. Department of Education is very curious about this phenomena. In fact, Wednesday next week, I'm going to the White House. Wow. I've been invited to speak with some of the president's advisors on education. I know it sounds exciting, but it'll probably be just 30 minutes. But there is great interest in what we do with all of this disruption that students are flocking to. The Department of Education recently announced they will do 10 experiments that partners a university with a provider of distance education courses and test the student outcome. So that's what the United States Department of Education is doing about it. The greatest concern is that there's a perception that the universities, their graduates, are simply not prepared to enter the professions. I don't know if that's problems other places, but it certainly is something we talk a great deal about in the United States.
Yo tengo una pregunta para la doctora LEAH, y es si yo puedo ser su secretaria para su visita a la Casa Blanca. I have a question for you. Can I be your secretary for your visit to the White House?
Okay, sure.
La próxima pregunta es si tiene esta agencia, el DEAC, comunicación con otras agencias de acreditación, tal como la Comisión Media de Educación Superior, por ejemplo. Do you have any communication/collaboration with other accreditation agencies, such as the Middle Commission on Higher Education?
Okay. At DEAC, we work very closely with accrediting organizations in the United States. I do some work internationally in Europe. I've gone to the Caribbean. We're doing some work with the MOET in Vietnam, the Quality Assurance Agency there, and we're about to do some work with China. It's very important to collaborate with another government's quality assurance entity. For example, if you wanted to have an established facility in the United States, you would need to communicate with the state. For example, New York. You would want to make sure that you have the proper legal authority by the state to operate. And then next comes working with an accrediting organization such as DEAC. More and more organizations are being created to help collaboration in quality assurance and accreditation. CHIA, the group I listed for diploma mill information, also has an international networking group. There's information on their website if you wanted to learn more about this area.
Con esto finalizamos la sección de preguntas y respuestas para la doctora LEAH Matthews. Por favor, démosle un caluroso aplauso.